Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. Today's video comes to us courtesy of my patrons who get to vote on a video I make every month. And this time around, they've settled on a theme that's in a very strange space. Yu-Gi-Oh is no stranger to putting monsters in the background. A crystal beast pioneered the mechanic by retreating there when they get destroyed, and it's been leaned on by a bunch of modern themes like Snake Eyes and Centurion. Heck, even True Draco is getting in on the action now. But somewhere in between were the monsters who enjoyed acting like spell and trap cards, but had the self-confidence not to flaunt it all over the place. This theme of ancient weapons and armor was a very interesting design space to explore, looking to answer the question, in a field of easily accessible rank 4 monsters, how do we get rank 5s into the action? And so, the challenge was set, the cards were printed, and the doors to the vault were flung wide open, and in some instances, they became the most devastating cards the game had ever known. So get ready to face off against the artifacts explained. Today's episode is possible thanks to viewers like you, as well as my patrons. If you like what I do here, I would super appreciate it if you'd subscribe to help us reach another wonderful milestone video. And if you want to support me directly while getting some awesome benefits, check out the link to my Patreon in the description below. So what's the deal with artifacts? Well, each one has a lot in common. All of the main deck ones are level 5 light fairy monsters, and they can be set in the spell and trap card zone as spell cards. And during your opponent's turn, if this set card in the spell and trap card zone is destroyed and sent to the grave, you can special summon it, and also has a trigger effect whenever it is special summoned at all during your opponent's turn. Achilles Shield has 1500 attack and 2200 defense, and prevents your opponent from targeting artifact monsters for attacks the turn it's summoned, which has the very real chance of just skipping an opponent's battle phase. Aegis has 1200 attack and 2500 defense, and artifact monsters you control cannot be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects until the end of the opponent's turn this card was special summoned, giving you some nifty blanket protection for that turn. Beagle Talk has 1400 attack and 2100 defense, and destroys up to 2 set cards you control when summoned, minimum 1, which can help mobilize more artifacts, and would be more palatable if it wasn't a mandatory effect. Caduceus has 1600 attack and 2400 defense, and you can only control a single copy of it. And instead of having its own effect, it draws you a card whenever an artifact is special summoned during your opponent's turn. But this card has to be face up on the field to activate and resolve that effect, thus making you vulnerable to the not-so-common Book of Moon. However, it does give you a nice draw engine. Fail Not has 2000 attack and 1600 defense, and targets an artifact in your grave and sets it as a spell card in your back row, setting you up for follow-up plays. Mjolnir has 1300 attack and 1800 defense, and just special summons an artifact from the grave in defense position, but you can't special summon until the end of the next turn except artifact monsters. Something that's very powerful for your own theme because it means you get to trigger more effects, and is downright dubious if you summon it to your opponent's field during your own turn, because even if they don't have an artifact to target, the effect is still mandatory. Moral Talk has 2100 attack and 1400 defense, and destroys a face-up card your opponent controls, making it the backbone of the old hand artifact trap tricks decks, or HAT for short. And Scythe has 2200 attack and 900 defense, and for the opponent's turn that it's special summoned, your opponent can't special summon monsters from the extra deck, an absolutely back-breaking effect which has gotten this card rightfully banned. Now, this isn't all of the artifacts, but they are all the ones that will follow the usual formula. Some of these are hits, like Moral Talk and Scythe, a lot of them are misses, and contribute to how slow the archetype is. We certainly aren't looking at a theme that's geared towards being a fast-acting threat, and will come to be defined far more by its standout utility creatures that were thrown into other decks, as opposed to being a theme all its own. They truly are an artifact of another age. Yes, even the new ones. Next up, we have our specialty artifacts. All of them can still be set in the back row as spell cards, and still summon themselves if destroyed while set in the back row during your opponent's turn. However, instead of having an on-summon effect, generally, they have some other utility. Artifact Chakram has 1900 attack and 2000 defense, and during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that would destroy any number of spell or trap cards that you control while this card is in your hand, you can return a set spell or trap card you control to the hand to special summon this card from your hand. Now, this feels a little counterintuitive. You want your set spell and trap cards to be destroyed to trigger your artifacts, so why would you play this as a hand trap to save them, thus bypassing the entire gimmick? Well, one of the benefits of running a deck full of landmines is that your opponent isn't really incentivized to take random pot shots at your face down back row, which means generally those cards are safe from interaction. But what if the opponent gets a lucky shot? Or heaven forbid they just deploy Feather Duster and go for broke. Well, in that scenario, you can use Chakram to scoop up your non-artifact back row while leaving the others to their fate. Now, does this mean it's worth playing? I don't think so, but I figured it would be worth it to throw out my 2 cents. Artifact Labrys has 2300 attack and 1000 defense, and when any number of artifact cards are destroyed and sent to the graveyard except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. So you get a free goober to go along with your other goobers when they get blasted. This thankfully works if they're destroyed while in the back or front row, but keep in mind that it does miss timing, so the last thing to happen needs to be an artifact getting smacked. But not by battle, the damage step is very sensitive about stuff like that. But honestly, it feels like a bunch of hoops to jump through for a card that's positioned as a way to get more material onto the board to perform Xyz summons while being slightly better in combat than its companion. If I was on the bad end of this design decision, I'd really have an axe to grind. Artifact Lancia has 1700 attack and 2300 defense, and during your opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you contribute this card from your hand or face-up field to make it so neither player can banish cards for the rest of the turn. That is an unusual effect, at least in terms of the theme itself. We're no stranger to deploying Floodgate tactics, see Artifact Scythe for more details, but the extra deck is used by so many decks in this game, it's honestly stranger if you don't use it. So Scythe makes sense as a general purpose stun card, but banishing isn't quite as widespread. Combine that with how you don't even have to engage with the artifact mechanic to make use of this, and you've created a card that can see play in basically any deck during formats where banishing is important. And lo and behold, that's exactly what's happened. If Mortal Talk was the artifact you recognized when the theme first came out, Lancia is the card you know about now because it crops up as a hand trap pretty frequently in the modern age. From how cards pay their costs to the forms that removal takes, banishing has become more and more integral to how certain decks function. So much like how Dimension Shifter is the go-to card for shutting off the grave as a mechanic, Lancia fills a similar role against any deck that requires the use of banishing to function. Now, does it do anything for the theme proper? Heck no! Lancia saw where the archetype was going and decided it wanted some of that hand trap notoriety instead, and honestly, I think it made the right choice getting that bag. Artifact Vajra has 1800 attack and 1900 defense, and if this card is special summoned during your opponent's turn, destroy all cards in your spell and trap zone. Also, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand. This is basically a required 3 of in any artifact deck nowadays, period. And this gives you a way to blast all your own back row even when your opponent isn't biting, by using their removal to clear things out. This does kind of power creep Beagle Talk out of the deck, but honestly Beagle Talk sucks, so I'm happy to see it go. Besides, we already had a sword in the roster, we don't need another one. Alright, that's all the main deck monsters. Now it's time to take a short trip over to the extra deck. First up is Artifact Durandal, a rank 5 Xyz monster with 2400 attack and 2100 defense, requiring 2 level 5 monsters as material. And once per turn as a quick effect, you can activate one of these effects. When a monster effect is activated on the field, or when a normal spell or trap card is activated, you can detach an Xyz material from this card to make the activated effect become destroy one spell or trap card your opponent controls. Or, you can detach an Xyz material from this card to make each player with a hand shuffle their entire hand into the deck, then draw the same number of cards they shuffled into the deck. So the first effect is an enabler for the theme, effectively being a pseudo-negate that forces the destruction of your back row. It's the kind of effect that I adore. It's not quite saying no to your opponent, it's more like making a strongly worded suggestion to do otherwise. In function though, I'm not a fan, because what we're looking at is an extra deck boss monster that needs 2 level 5 monsters as material, and that's helping you enable your theme's mechanics, which is putting the cart before the horse. The boss monster shouldn't be the enabler, it should be the payoff, at least. It should be adding devastating bonus effects whenever your back row gets tanked, or being an access point to something bigger and better. Instead, what it does is barely go toe-to-toe against monarchs. Not exactly my idea of a threat. And it doesn't help that the second effect is just a mulligan for all players involved. Sure, you can ship back some bad draws, maybe even get your garnets all back in the deck, but the only thing this is really good for is setting up some of the most devious hand rips in the game. Are you perhaps familiar with the dreaded combo between Droll Lockbird and Trickstar Reincarnation? I mean, you should, I already did the Trickstar episode, but as a quick reminder, at any point when your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, except during the draw phase, you can activate Reincarnation's on-field effect, causing them to banish what they have in hand to draw the same amount, effectively flushing out what they might have searched. But if you then activate Droll Lockbird later on in the chain, then no one can add cards from their deck to their hand. So when Reincarnation goes to resolve, it'll still banish, it just won't draw them anything at the other end. Durandal can do the exact same thing, filling in the role of Reincarnation. Heck, as a monster, it's arguably even more effective in that role since you don't have to wait a turn to activate Reincarnation after it's set. Though, keep in mind that this will affect both you and your opponent, since Droll Lockbird puts that restriction on both players, and Durandal has both players shuffling back, so just make sure you put all of your good cards on the board before you activate this. So, if you're already on some rank 5 nonsense, I hear K9 are doing some solid work nowadays, just mind the light exceeds monster restriction, you too can cause your opponent to lose their spark of life and drift wistfully into tomorrow, thinking of the hand they could never have. You know what, maybe Artifact Durandal isn't so bad after all. Artifact Dogda is a Link 2 monster with 1500 attack, requiring 2 monsters with different names as material. When an effect of another card on the field is activated, as a quick effect, you can set an artifact monster from your hand or deck to your spell and trap zone as a spell card, but destroy it during your opponent's next end phase. During your opponent's turn, if this Link summoned card is destroyed, you can special summon an artifact monster from your grave in defense position. This, perhaps more than any other card, has essentially solidified artifacts as a support theme, and is the nail in the coffin for it even being used pure. Its material requirements are one of the easiest to meet in the game, and its activation conditions are laughable. Sure, the effect misses timing, but when your trigger condition is any effect being activated by anyone, it's hard to make a complaint about that. Back when Artifact Scythe was still legal, this was its perfect pair, being yoinked out of the extra deck to help form an end board that would prevent as much Yu-Gi-Oh from being played as possible. Granted, while the self-destruction would still summon out the artifact in question, Scythe isn't quite as effective when summoned at the end of someone's turn, but most decks that used it had a plan to pop their own back row the second the opportunity allowed. Not to mention that because Dogda's floating effect summoned more artifacts out of the graveyard, this was a ticking time bomb that could summon out Scythe again for a whole new round of extra deck sealing. So it's no wonder that, ever since Scythe was banned, Dogda isn't seeing much use. Sadly, many of the artifacts don't really have good utility outside of their theme. Arguably, Moral Talk is the only one worth combining with this, but removal is so cheap and accessible nowadays, why would you bother going through all the hoops? When using artifacts pure, this is a ridiculous enabler, filling your back row with inevitable monsters. But in the broader context of the game, it's certainly lost its luster. And worse yet, while I'd always planned on this bit ending in a Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse reference, shout out to my boy Dogda who did nothing wrong, but I ended up using it in a custom card showcase instead recently, so I guess stealth plug for that series, gotcha. Alright, that does it for the monsters. Now it's time for the spells and traps. Artifact Ignition is a quick play spell card that targets a spell or trap card on the field and destroys that target. And if you do, set an artifact monster directly from your deck to your spell and trap zone as a spell card. And if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, your opponent skips their next battle phase. But you must have an artifact monster in your main deck to activate this card. That's a very funny parenthetical because it's pretty much answered by its own effect. If you didn't have an artifact to set, you'd have to show that off pretty immediately since you have to set one from deck. But that doesn't mean it wasn't widely used. On release, this was viewed as MST with upside. You could get Moral Talk into rotation, and maybe future ignitions could be used to actually destroy it to get that monster onto the board. In the meantime, you also had an answer to back row, and at quick speed, no less. It was, for a lot of decks, a very nifty utility piece for a long while. And I suppose at some point someone must have tripped over this and triggered the battle phase skip effect, but I doubt it was a common occurrence. And I mean, it can't even be that bad. I mean, Runics do that to themselves all the time, and they seem to be fine. Artifacts Unleashed is a quick play spell card that targets 2 artifact monsters you control to immediately Xyz summon an Xyz monster using those 2 monsters only. Also for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, monsters you control can't attack except artifact monsters. And if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can reveal a level 5 light monster from your hand to draw a card. So we have a quick Xyz summon card, which I'm not really a big fan of. I like it when the monsters have that capability themselves. But for its time, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we are summoning out material during our opponent's turn, so Unleashed folds them into a bigger monster immediately before our opponent gets a chance to act on it. And if your opponent retaliates by trying to remove this, well, you might get a free card out of it. And the best part is, it doesn't really restrict what you can make with them, so any rank 5 monster is yours for the taking. Or you could go the way of El Shaddoll Fusion and attack with 2 artifacts during the battle phase, drop Unleashed to make Durandal, and go in for more damage if you somehow find yourself on the beatdown. Honestly, this card is just waiting for you to unleash its true potential. And to help put this sword back together before Mom and Dad get home, otherwise they're gonna be so mad. Artifact Sanctum is a normal trap card that special summons an artifact monster from your deck, but you can't conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this card. And if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target a card on the field and destroy that card. So following the footsteps of the previous cards, we have one that punishes your opponent for trying to get rid of them before they get deployed. And the temptation is going to be pretty strong because this is a good one. Being able to drop any artifact at a moment's notice means those utility ones are going to be pretty easily accessible. So during the formats where these cards are at peak power, this is the one you'll want to see to help deploy them. It's also worth mentioning that with the way the card is worded, you can have your cake and eat it too. Sanctum, and the rest of our spell and trap cards we've already mentioned, only check to see if they're destroyed by the opponent, but don't care about any other factors. So if your opponent points some destruction removal at it while it's set, you can flip it to activate it, getting the full value and still getting the trigger effect from your opponent popping it. In this case, getting to remove one of their cards. It's really strong, especially if artifacts ever get a second wind and become a deck again. But don't get so on your high horse about its power that you start getting sanctimonious about it. So that's all the artifact cards, but what do we do with them? Well, play an older format and use them to form one of the best decks of pre-Duelist Alliance times. For today, well, that's gonna be pretty tricky. We've got to incorporate cards that incentivize our opponent to destroy our back row, as well as alternate ways to get our artifacts onto the field during our opponent's turn, because I'm sure not gonna make a habit out of relying on the opponent to get our game plan online. And of course, any light fairy or level 5 synergies would be greatly appreciated. So what can we play to help them out? Well, the first thing I like bringing up is that they make incredible material for Constellar Pleiades. While not the titan of removal it was back in its heyday, a quick compulsory evacuation device on legs is still nothing to sneeze at. You can remove your opponent's cards, but also save your own. Not to mention it makes for a great bridge into other cards. Ptolemy M7 is more bouncing, and while it loses that quick speed to the effect, as well as only being able to hit monsters, it can now start aiming towards the graveyards too, meaning it also works as recursion. And while a Constellar monster isn't the requirement for Satellite Constellar Diamond's Chaos Xyz Evolution summon, if you can get 3 artifacts onto the board, you can actually make it using its intended material, giving you a massively powerful hate piece against any dark deck that you've been wanting to get revenge on. Another move is to just summon your artifacts on your own terms at quick speed without trying to gaslight your opponent into breaking your back row. Mjolnir already got that memo, so why stop there? Call of the Haunted was a pretty slick option for a while, giving you a moral talk during your opponent's turn, sniping one of their cards and giving you a sizable body to boot. But today, we've got many more options. Back to the Front doesn't have the issue of being a continuous trap card, so removal doesn't count as negation against it, and while the monster is summoned in defense position, many of our artifacts actually have bigger defenses than their attacks, so for them, that's actually a bonus. I guess also shout out to Oasis of Dragon Souls, which has the worst of both worlds, summoning in defense position and also being a continuous trap card. But hey, it's more revivals. But if you want to stick with Call of the Haunted style effects but want more value, try playing Double Hooking. That card gets 2 monsters at the cost of a discard, which you might be able to take advantage of by ditching an artifact from your hand just to summon it right back out. And hey, that's artifact Durandal material right there. Or heck, make the Pleiades and bounce the double hooking back to your hand to use again, because while double hooking blows itself up if either of the summoned monsters leave the field, using a monster as Xyz material doesn't count as them leaving the field, preserving that trap card for potential later use. If you don't want to mess around with the graveyard though, Celestial Transformation has you covered. As a quick play spell card, summoning during your opponent's turn is a breeze. Now sure, the attack is halved and it's gonna get self-exploded at the end of the turn, but if you're playing the other revival cards, that just means you gave it new targets. Not to mention that with Artifacts Unleashed, you can turn them into Xyz material before any of those drawbacks become relevant. But sometimes, you've just gotta go along with how the deck is set up and play by its rules. So how can we profitably destroy our own cards when we need to do some sweet summons? Thankfully, we have some stellar options. Heavy Storm Duster can take out 2 back row cards, which means we can mobilize our artifacts twice as fast, and even snipe our opponents if need be. And losing the battle phase is a paltry drawback since we're aiming to use it during our opponent's turn anyway. But I think my favorite card to deploy in this deck is a relatively new one, Trap-holic. It destroys one of our spell and trap cards to set a normal trap card from our deck, and that card can be activated that turn as long as we have 3 or more trap cards in the graveyard. So we get to blast an artifact, thus summoning it, setting a Sanctum from our deck, then immediately using that one to get more artifacts. And while that's arguably the best option, it's not our only one. You may also want to try using Trap Trick, which can just get your Sanctum at the cost of banishing another copy of it, or if you have any spare monsters to chew on, you can use Trap Tracks to trade them out for a Sanctum. We've also got a couple of monsters that like aping Artifacts style, though technically one of them predates the existence of these cards. Silver and Sunlit Sentinel both set to the spell and trap card zone like artifacts, and after being destroyed while set there by an opponent's card effect and sent to the grave, special summon themselves. Silver Sentinel during the end phase of that turn, while Sunlit does so during the standby phase of the next turn. Silver can destroy any card our opponent controls, while Sunlit is able to deal with everything in the column that it's summoned to. Both of them are pretty cool, but because they both require our opponent to destroy them, we can't use the usual tricks we use to summon our artifacts. We can't exactly combo these with Vajra after all. I also really wanted to add in the Toy Box series of cards. They're a very powerful engine in White Forest after all, so having more monsters that go from the spell and trap card zone to the graveyard that summon themselves seemed like an easy pick. The problem is that Toy Box only destroys your cards using its activated effect during your own turn. The effect that negates your opponent's attacks, that sends your face down cards to the graveyard, so no artifact triggers here. Though it's not a total wash. Just because the toy cards don't work with the artifacts doesn't mean that the artifacts can't help out the toys. And like I said, it's a pretty powerful engine, so you might want to consider including it. As for a silly tech pick, well, remember how I said that Mjolnir can do a convincing gimmick puppet nightmare impression? Well, we don't need Sanctifier to make it a reality here. We just need Imperial Princess Quinquiri, an Xyz monster that can summon any level 5 monster from any grave to any field. And it's even rank 5. That's right, we don't have to play anything off the beaten path. We can just access Quinquiri entirely in engine. Use their effects to give your opponent a Mjolnir and watch as their whole life shatters before their very eyes. But like, what did they expect? A random Yu-Gi-Oh player being worthy of the power of Thor's hammer? I don't think so. And that's all I've got to say about artifacts. I wish I had better things to say about this theme, but I can't lie. The theme just doesn't do enough as a whole to be worth the time and effort of making a specific deck for it, and it doesn't look like the dev team is going to be fixing that issue anytime soon. The worthwhile cards were stripped for parts long ago, and only a tattered husk remains, leaving these weapons of ancient power and glory to gather dust. It's just one of those sad artifacts of life. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Are artifacts memorabilia of a bygone era, or are they on the cusp of igniting a new age of swords and sorcery? And which one's your favorite? Immortal Talk is iconic, but I feel like Vajra is too dynamic to ignore. Let me know your favorite down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like this video if you liked it. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Be sure to check out one of my videos in the sidebar to help me show up on your homepage, and be sure to share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout while helping out the channel. It was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander, Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, 50 Gigabytes, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Battle Axe, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Marion James Ipagata, Meme King, Millennia Asta, Muse Clark, Neon Yaminair, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Pat Boos, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sonic 21 Blast, The Critic of Innocence, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Ally Vatnia, Animasta, Anthrak, A Random Pup, Blitzwolf, Chaz Ghost, Christopher Fuss, again, Chris B, Cool Trainer Dark, Dr. Entity RIP, EB Channel, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, Inblink, Julian Marquez, Kale the Dragon, Lobomaru02, Manga Pages, Natiel Lee Alexander, Nitromo, Not Al Gore, Obsidian, Pombo, Rhyme Kairos, Shizuka Nijimura, Simic Toadstool, Sir Knight JCB, Svilia, Stephen Huntsman, Stephen Williamson, The Legendary Raven, The Phantom Knights of Shitted Pants, The Queen of Time, The Gene, Tiger X2476, Tristan O'Meara and Zaldrucka, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another theme of monsters that love hanging out in the back row, check out this video where I cover Crystal Beasts. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.